Welcome, everyone. We're going to give it about a minute to let everyone join. Maybe I won't even do the full minute. I think we're just going to go ahead and get started. We have a bunch of people already joining, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Melissa, and I am part of Guardify's team. We're so excited to have you all join us today. Guardify is a digital evidence management platform where we work with CACs, CPS, prosecutors, advocates, law enforcement, and beyond across the country. I do want to go over some housekeeping notes before we turn it over to Shelly. If you like a copy of the presentation slides today, you can access them by using the link in the chat box. And also, please look out for an email later this afternoon that will explain how you can complete the evaluation form, but also to receive your certificate. And then please complete that form within the 30 days after today. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them in the Q&A box rather than the chat box or by raising your hand. We've got a large group today, so our presenter, Shelly, will be going to wait until the end to address them. If Shelly is unable to answer them live during our time of day, she'll go ahead and send a follow-up email with those answers. And we also want to go ahead and show you some upcoming events. We do have a live webinar March 13, 2025, so this year, next month, called Breaking Barriers, Understanding and Empowering Survivors of Sexual Assault by Clarence, October. We also have our Guardify's Real Evidence podcast, so make sure to check out Ashley and Myron after this webinar as they explore how technology, people, and processes unite to reshape the landscape of justice and community. But we're so honored to host today's webinar, YOLO, Strategies for Intentional MDT Leadership by Shelley Hitzel. Shelly is the Executive Director of the CAC of Niagara and Niagara Falls Memorial Medical Center. With over 15 years of experience in social work and leadership, she brings a unique perspective on thriving and upstream thinking. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Shelly.
Great, thank you. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you all today, kind of coming through your devices for the next hour or so, talking about MDT leadership strategies. But before we kick off the presentation, I would like to just ask everyone kind of to take a moment wherever you are at. We have, like Melissa said, there's a lot of people on the call today from all across the country. So just asking everyone to kind of take a minute where you're at. Notice the space that you're in, look around, listen, find one thing in your space that brings you joy. It could be a picture, a quote, an award, a gift, a piece of jewelry, a tattoo, a to-do list with more things crossed off than left to finish. Whatever it is, just find that thing and take a moment to feel the joy, feel the positivity that that thing brings you. And thank you for entertaining that for me. So who am I? Who is this person kind of starting off this MDT training in such a woo-woo way? If you haven't already guessed, I am a social worker. With trauma-informed care being kind of the center of how I operate. I'm also the executive director, as Melissa mentioned, at the Child Advocacy Center of Niagara. I'm a lifelong learner. Give me something new to read, to consider, to practice, and I am a happy person. I'm an advocate, I'm a leader, I'm kind of all of these things are who I am, and they are how I identify personally. But who I am is also a ton of things not on this screen, right? I'm a mother, I'm a friend, I'm a daughter of a central spinal cord injury survivor. I witnessed domestic violence and drug abuse growing up. 2 weeks after I graduated from high school, my father died of a fentanyl overdose. I have been married and divorced before the age of 35. I have been sober for 3 years. I feel most peaceful in nature. I like comfortable, soft clothes. I do not like wearing shoes. I think Boston Terriers are the best dogs around. Messes stress me out, and I have a 4-year-old that thrives in the chaos of a dump toy bin, right? Who I am is a mix of all of those things, and I think that, that's true for all of us on the call today. So just a disclaimer before we get started, I am going to talk about information today that I have found to be useful as I have experienced and navigated the MDT and the CAC in different roles for the last 15 years. So we're going to touch on a lot of things today. It will resonate with some of you. Others it won't, and that is absolutely okay. My goal is that you take what you connect with, what speaks to you personally, and you can go ahead and leave the rest. So I do want to start with just getting an idea of kind of who is on the call today. So there will be a poll that'll be popping up. If you don't mind just taking a minute to answer how long you have been part of an MDT. And while folks are answering that, I do just want to take a minute just to give you kind of a quick overview of my Child Advocacy Center in Niagara County so that you have that as a reference point as we go through the material today and as I provide kind of some examples based on my CAC and my experience. So I am part of a child advocacy center that opened in 1995. So we're going on 30 years, or we will be 30 years this year. We are a hospital-based CAC. We're part of an independent nonprofit hospital. We have all of the core services on site, so forensic interviewing, medical services, mental health, advocacy services. In our county, there are 6 CPS units and 7 law enforcement agencies that we work with as part of our MDT. And that encompasses town, city, county, and state jurisdictions. And then we have a district attorney's office with a special victims unit that handles the prosecution of our cases. Our MDT is not co-located. Nor do any of our partners have sex crime specific units, meaning our CPS, law enforcement, and assistant district attorneys all respond to crimes kind of beyond child abuse. And then additionally, our CAC coordinates our Safe Harbor program. That's a program for youth who have been identified as victims of sex trafficking, labor trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation. And also we coordinate our county's child fatality review team, amongst other things. And in terms of our geographical location, we are in Western New York. So we are kind of in the northwestmost corner of the state. We're a mix of urban, suburban, and rural areas with 3 main cities, Niagara Falls being one of them. And the largest of them, that is where our main office is located. And then we have a satellite office in the east end of our county as well.
Thank you for sharing that. So we have a bunch of, let me go ahead and go through the results. So we have about 14% that have been in the field less than a year, and then 35% that have been in the field for about 1 to 4 years, and then 27% that have been in the field for 5 to 9 years. And lastly, which I'm surprised about, 25% that have been in the field over 10 years. That's amazing.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's a really, I think, good mix of kind of experience and expertise on the MDT. So I'm excited for kind of questions at the end, but also just for anyone who has thoughts and wants to weigh in on their experience as part of the MDT. So let's start with kind of team leadership and what I would say is kind of the less than cliff note version of team leadership. If you've delved into the topic at all, then I think you already know that there are many different definitions, different leadership styles, different leadership types, etc. But I really think that kind of at its most basic, team leadership is about bringing people together to achieve a common goal. But at its most complicated, team leadership is about bringing people together to achieve a common goal. right? One of the things that I found most challenging about the literature, the research, the theories is all of the information that exists. So there's around 66 leadership theories, 20 different leadership styles, and then there's this dichotomy that exists or seems to exist in terms of the differing theories, what works and when. So even just looking at this slide, which shows just two types of team leadership, with traditional leadership being on the left of the slide, modern leadership being on the right of the slide, you can see the contrast in just these two. So for me, it really ends up feeling like that mess of outlets and cords on the slide that looks really similar to my stepdad's Christmas setup every year. So to try to simplify it a little bit for today's discussion, I just want to consider a few things that are agreed upon in terms of the literature and the responsibilities or skills of an effective team leader. So things like establishing culture, promoting teamwork, being able to engage in high-level decision-making, clear communication, facilitating others' performance, delegating, goal setting, creating a shared vision. The difficulty, I think, that presents for us in applying these skills are the nuances of the multidisciplinary team and how MDTs differ from teams within the same agency or even within the same field. So what are some of the things that make MDT leadership more difficult and not really fit the mold of typical team leadership? These are just some of the things that I have encountered or experienced on the MDT. So I think one of the biggest things is that you're trying to bring together multiple agencies, multiple disciplines with different missions, different working environments, and different work cultures, right? And then these are also agencies that have different goals, different performance expectations, and this is extremely difficult to do. Even when we have a shared MDT vision and shared goals, there's always going to be this underlying and competing factors within our individual organizations that have to be considered. And then we're also going to have people on our team that have varying levels of expertise, right? Varying levels of buy-in. And we're going to have what I call reluctant representatives. Because the truth is there's going to be people on the MDT that don't really want to be on the MDT. And sometimes it feels like you're trying to coach a basketball team where some of the players really enjoy basketball, some are skilled at basketball, others wanted to play hockey, but they didn't make that team, and this was their their only option or their second option. Some people hate the game and do their best to stay off the court, and some could really honestly care less about if the team wins the game. And the difference here is that as the coach, right, of an MDT, you don't have the ability to choose who's on your team. You have to make the best of the team you have, a team that unfortunately for a lot of us is also going to be changing very frequently. And then I think the other element that MDTs face is that this work is hard, right? Capital HARD, hard. The trauma is real. The burnout is real. It's not easy to stay in these positions long enough to even be at a place where you feel comfortable leading. And we'll talk more later about the challenges of working within systems that are designed to be reactive, which are the systems that all of us are working in. And then we have this element of authority, right? So most team leaders in a typical setting have some level of authority over the team. That's usually not the case with MDTs. You might have some level of authority within your agency or within your discipline, but typically no real authority over the larger MDT in general. And then the last barrier that I've experienced or I've encountered, and I know other teams experience and encounter, is this idea of a leader's mindset. This is the idea or the theory that to be a leader, your definition of results needs to change from what they are when you are considered an individual contributor. So, as an individual contributor, your results are the work that you do, the work that you did. But leaders deliver results through other people, and thus we own the results of everyone on our team. So leaders really need to shift their thinking from I am responsible for my results to I'm responsible for delivering results through other people. And when we're thinking about this in the context of an MDT in terms of a multidisciplinary team, we're then thinking about how do we shift this mindset, not just for ourselves, but ideally, we need everyone on the team thinking this way. But at the same time, we also need to continue to recognize that every discipline has its own individual responsibilities, its own individual results, right? So CPS in terms of my state in New York is going to be thinking about safety and permanency. Law enforcement is thinking about criminal charges. The district attorney's office, the prosecution, they're thinking about beyond a reasonable doubt. Forensic interviews are thinking about, conducting their neutral fact-finding interview and adhering to their model. Medical staff are concerned or thinking about the physical health of the children coming into the center. And, our mental health clinicians are thinking about and concerned about the mental health of the children and clients coming into the center. So we're on teams where everyone has an independent role. So how do we keep our MDT rooted in this idea that at the same time, the best outcome for the victim, for the investigation, and for treatment is when we're all owning each other's results. So there are some things that make MDT leadership more difficult, right? But then there are also some things that MDTs need in order to function optionally and optimally. And what are the things that MDT leaders should be paying attention to? So if you're looking at this slide, on the left are 3 categories that are important for teams. This information was taken from a recent study, a 2024 study by McGuire et al., and I do have it linked at the end if anyone is interested in accessing it, and you can access it if you have Calio at your center. You can access kind of the full text of it. But what we're looking at here is if you look at the boxes of the table that's on the left of your screen, you're going to be looking at 3 categories that are important for teams. So effective aspects. This is going to be things like how do group members feel about each other and the team. Things like trust, respect, cohesion or closeness within the team, collective efficacy, or the shared belief in the team's ability to make a positive impact. And then we have in the middle the behavioral processes. So how do group members act? And then you have in the last box the cognitive aspects, or how do group members think? Then on the right are things that can be either facilitators or barriers to cross-agency collaboration and team functioning. So what the study found was that the effective aspects, so liking, trusting, respecting, feeling psychologically safe amongst your team, and then the cognitive aspect related specifically to having clear shared understanding of the MDT purpose and goals, were the things that were significantly associated with team members' performance. So kind of to summarize, high quality relationships among team members is associated or most significantly associated with team performance and with better performance. And that is the stuff that makes my social worker heart happy. So how do we kind of start to take all of this research about team leadership and functioning and the very limited research related to kind of MDT leadership and know where to start, especially if you're new to the team or new to your position on the team? So I've broken it down into 4 parts and using the acronym YOLO because we love an acronym here in MDT land. And this is what we're going to talk about for the rest of our time today. But I do just want to kind of preface that, and with the caveat of we're going to be talking about these things broadly. So only you will know kind of the best way to start thinking about how to apply them to yourself and how to apply them to your team. So we're going to look at knowing yourself, knowing the organization, learning others, and then how do you take all of that knowledge and start to optimize your team? Oh, the most basic tenet of good leadership is self-awareness. So that is where we are going to start. We're going to start with knowing yourself. Most people think about knowing themselves and self-awareness in terms of knowing and practicing our strengths and understanding and managing our weakness. And we kind of think about this as the foundation of self-awareness. But professional self-awareness, I think, is much more than strengths and weaknesses. And the journey to becoming self-aware, of really knowing yourself personally and professionally, I think is obviously a process that we do not have time to cover today. So for our purposes today, I definitely want us to think about knowing ourselves in terms of our strengths, our weaknesses, our communication style, etc. Some of those things that we're used to kind of hearing about and thinking about. But I also want us to be thinking about knowing ourselves in terms of the competencies that you've developed, either formally or informally, through your education, your training, your experience. And then thinking about the personality traits you possess that you project and you demonstrate at work, whether that is projecting, demonstrating, and possessing them in a favorable way or in an unfavorable way. And then what are your values and beliefs that ground how you behave and how you decide? So I want to touch on 3 things that aren't typically talked about, but I believe are important in the work that we do on MDTs and how we show up as leaders amongst our MDT. The first being your personal why, right? So, what is your personal why for doing this work? What is your personal why for bearing witness to the trauma of children? And not just trauma, but the most inhumane, violent, vile types of trauma, right? It's extremely difficult to do this work. And honestly, I think it's incredibly selfless to do this work. So why do you do it? And why do you stay doing it? Knowing the why kind of, I think, keeps us rooted in the parts of the work that feel fulfilling. It keeps us focused on the bigger picture, and it gives us reference for how we show up day to day in our jobs and in our work. And so when I started my career at the CAC 15 years ago now, I think my why is a little bit different than it is today. And when we started this presentation, kind of I asked everyone to take a minute, right, to find something in your space that brings you joy and to sit with that for a second, to sit with that feeling, to identify it and to acknowledge it. Because in doing this work, we get busy and we get busier and we forget, right? We forget why we're here, why we're doing this. We forget the parts that feel fulfilling. And in my opinion, the longer you do this work, the harder it becomes to kind of stay rooted in the why, especially if your why is changing. And that's how we get burnout. So I think that in addition to knowing our why, it's also important, and we want to be reassessing our why on a regular basis to determine if it's aligned with our current role. So I mentioned that my why has changed a little bit. When I first started, and for most of my career, my why was because I found it to be an incredible honor to witness the strength of child abuse victims and survivors, for them to be able to disclose their abuse, to feel safe at the CAC and with the MDT, and to be a part of the process and see them begin to heal. My why was very child centered. And then I became a parent, and my why changed a bit because I understood child abuse from a different context, from a different relationship. And my why became a bit less focused on victims and a bit more focused on punishing the people who would and could abuse a child. For me, this was important to recognize because that why was personal, right? It was rooted in negativity, it was rooted in fear, and it gave power to offenders. And it also does not resonate with my professional values. And I also think that if my why had shifted like that while I was in a role or any other role on the MDT, then executive director, if my why had shifted while I was the MDT coordinator, or the senior case coordinator, as it's called here, it may have impacted my ability to lead, or it may have impacted my ability to kind of stay immersed in the details of cases. So um, let's move on and we'll talk about about triggers and the importance of taking the time to know your triggers. So literature says, the research says, everything says that leaders benefit from self-regulation, from being able to remain emotionally stable, to have emotional intelligence, and these other kind of soft skills, right, as they're called. I think about it kind of as being the thermostat versus the thermometer, right? So leaders need to be the person who can regulate the group. If there is kind of one thing that can throw all of that out the window, it's when we're triggered. And I found that triggers can cause more issues and create bigger barriers than our weaknesses ever do. That's because when we're triggered, we're acting out of and from an emotional state, usually without knowing what that emotional state is. And that's the definition of reacting. And intentional leadership is about responding, not reacting. The difficult thing is that identifying and managing triggers requires a level of work that can be difficult, right? It requires us to go deeper than our weaknesses and really look at and acknowledge the root of some of our behaviors, the root of our emotions, etc., and look at how they show up in our work. Right. So you guys see the quote on the screen that says, when you can objectively see the patterns in your own behaviors, you can make adjustments for efficient results and better performance. You might be surprised to know that that quote is actually from a book entitled Astrology for the Soul. I personally have found astrology to be an effective tool in identifying my triggers, but I'm a Scorpio rising, so I am comfortable in the deep, shadowy aspects of my personality and of others' personalities. And it's honestly probably why I have been able to stay in this field for so long. But before I digress too far off of today's topics, just circling back and really, like I said, thinking about knowing your triggers and how knowing your triggers can help you to recognize when you are reacting rather than responding. And it gives you an opportunity when you're able to recognize your triggers to pause, to use the triggers as a teacher, if you so choose, or to simply course correct so that you don't act out of pocket with your team or with those that you lead. For me, when I get into this this is nice mindset that you can see on the slide here. I know I have to stop before I react. And one of the ways that this shows up for me is when I'm feeling overwhelmed at work. And most of the time, I don't even recognize that I'm feeling overwhelmed until I have this response to something, right? So I'm at work and I hear people in the office laughing. And, it brings up this feeling of anger or resentment. And I immediately think, like, oh, it must be nice. Must be nice to have nothing to do. It must be nice to be not busy. Is that the case? No. Everyone here is busy all the time. Do I want to shut down moments of joy in my office? Absolutely, absolutely not. But when that kind of thought spiral occurs, would it be easier to give in to the anger and the overwhelm and say, as the director, get back to work, or more passive aggressively, like, must be nice, to must not be too busy today, must be nice to have time to stand around. It 100% would be easier. It would be easy to react in that way. But that type of reaction erodes relationships, and it isn't even appropriate, right? It's not even the appropriate response for what I'm actually feeling, which is stress and overwhelm, not anger because my colleagues are laughing, right? And then if you take it one step further in terms of triggers, you look at, why am I feeling overwhelmed right now? What core belief is that bringing up for me, et cetera, et cetera. But again, it's a whole separate can of worms that we don't have time to talk about today. But looking at kind of the third thing on the last slide, and the third thing in terms of self-awareness and self-awareness as an MDT leader. We're going to talk about external feedback and how external feedback is necessary for self-awareness, or how others experience or describe us should align with how we understand ourselves. But it's another piece that we tend to avoid because it can be difficult when those things don't align. There are a lot of ways to get external feedback in our jobs and in our positions, but I really like this concept of the Johari window. So I wanted to share that today. And I'm going to take a break from talking for a minute because I think this video explains it much better than I can.
Meet Robin. Robin is a manager of a veterinary practice. She's strong-willed, extroverted, outspoken, charismatic, and ethical. At least, that's how she describes herself. Her colleagues would describe her as motivated, passionate, and strong-willed, but also as dominant, a poor listener, and a bit of a know-it-all. What if Robin received feedback on her positive and negative traits and behaviors? Wouldn't Robin and her team benefit from open communication and self-awareness? That is exactly what the Johari window model focuses on. The Johari window is a psychological tool to self-assess one's behavior as well as the relationship with others through feedback and disclosure. It was developed by psychologists Joseph Luft and Harry Ingham while researching group dynamics at UCLA, and is a simple tool for improving self-awareness, personal development, communication, interpersonal relationships, group dynamics, and team development. The model consists of 4 quadrants. The upper left quadrant is called the open area. This represents information you know about yourself that others know about you as well. Robin is strong-willed, extroverted, and outspoken. These traits are known to her and to those around her. The upper right quadrant is called the blind area. This area represents information others know about you, but you don't know about yourself. Robin is not aware of her tendency to interrupt people and that she's perceived as a poor listener. The lower left quadrant is called the hidden area. This represents the things you know about yourself that others don't know about you. Robin dreams of one day being a regional operations director and is an avid Lakers fan. If Robin keeps this information to herself, it's part of her hidden area. The bottom right quadrant is the unknown area. This represents the information that no one, including yourself, knows about you. Robin might have an undiscovered artistic talent. She might have unknown fears and insecurities that manifest in dominant behaviors. The ultimate goal of the Johari window is to enlarge the open area. The more people know about themselves and others, the more productive, cooperative, and effective they will be when working together. To increase your open area, you should follow 2 principles. Principle 1. Self-disclosure. Share work-related and appropriate personal information with others. If Robin shares that she's a Lakers fan, it will decrease her hidden area, increase her open area, and help her colleagues feel more comfortable to share appropriate personal information in return. Principle 2. Solicit feedback. Request feedback from others and be open to what is shared with you. If Robin receives feedback about her tendency to interrupt people, Robin's blind area will decrease, her open area will increase, and she will be in a position to change her behavior. If used correctly, the Johari window model is an essential tool to create self-awareness, work on organizational relations, and improve team performance. Think about your own Johari window. Where do you think you stand?
All right. And now you have a little bit of insight into my intentionality around sharing some of those things with you all and about myself when we started this presentation. But for the sake of time, I think we'll end this section in terms of knowing ourselves just with this thought from Brene Brown. So why do we need to know ourselves? Because who we are is how we lead. All right, and then let's move into the second part of the YOLO strategies, and that is knowing the organization or the organizations. So, team leadership research says that when we can connect our individual work on teams or our individual work to the team's mission and the team's impact, it gives people a sense of pride. It fuels their motivation, it reduces their stress. So, what does this mean for the nuances of an MDT? It means that you need to know and understand your discipline, the mission of your agency, and your role within your agency. But you also need to know and understand your role within the team. And then where and how do these align, and where and how do they differ? In addition, you need to know and understand all of the other disciplines on the team, the mission of their agencies, their roles within their agencies, their role within the MDT. And also, and I think most importantly for a leader, you need to know the areas where there may be conflict between the mission and roles of the different disciplines. And why is this important? I think because one of the biggest barriers to cross-agency collaboration or to MDT collaboration is the challenge for people to reconcile the goals and agendas prescribed by their agency or discipline with the role on, or with their role on, the MDT. So think about your current position. What are the areas where there's a rub or a conflict between how your agency expects you to do your job versus the expectations of being part of a multidisciplinary child abuse investigation and response team? I think regardless of your position, there will always be some area where the two roles don't always align. And that's true for every discipline on the team and every role on the team. So we need to be aware of where these conflicts occur and how are they showing up in our team's dynamics when they are occurring. And then another barrier is the idea that agencies or disciplines other than your own have the wrong priorities or the wrong philosophies. If you are on this webinar, I am sure you have many examples of how this presents on your own team, right? It sounds like, I don't understand why CPS this. I don't understand why prosecution that. I don't understand why the interviewer won't ask this. I don't understand why the therapist won't do that. Why does the CAC this? Why can't the CAC? This is so common on the MDT. The problem is that if someone isn't paying attention to and working to reconcile or resolve these things, your team's going to have higher conflict. They're going to have less trust, be less willing to share information, and be less willing to respect the perspective of those outside of their own discipline. So, how do you position yourself to lead your team through these challenges? I think that by being the person that helps other people on the team understand the policy and procedure, the mission of each discipline. When you have an understanding of the full picture of the MDT that you're working with, it's much easier to facilitate conversations in a way that highlight the value and importance of each MDT member or discipline has in the process. So rather than being the why does person, you position yourself as the this is why person, right? So this is why CPS can't go in and remove children immediately. They're required to work with the alleged subject to determine a safety plan. This is why law enforcement can't move forward with charges in this case, because the victim's age, because of the victim's age, they need independent corroborating evidence. This is why the ADA is moving forward with a lower level felony. The higher level felony would require the case to be introduced into the grand jury. The interviewer won't ask that question because it's considered leading, and it would jeopardize the neutrality of the interview and the neutrality of the disclosure. The CAC does that because they're awesome. That's why. Just making sure that everyone is still with me. But I think the other thing that we want to do as a leader is have a clear understanding of the MDT shared goals and guiding principles, right? So shared goals and guiding principles kind of in and of themselves are important because they give a team that joint purpose or collective sense of working towards the same goal. This is obviously important for MDTs, but it's also required in terms of best practice and accreditation for centers that are in teams that are accredited. The thing is, how many people on the MDT are actually reading, integrating, and referencing those guiding principles? On our MDT, we have CAPE, they're called our CAPE guidelines, our Child Abuse Intervention Project guidelines. It's an approximately a 40-page document that gets updated every 3 years. It gets signed off on by MDT leadership. It details the role of every discipline on the MDT. It details in depth every service from the FI and beyond. It details information sharing, case review, all of the things. It is clear, it is comprehensive, it has all of the characteristics of a good cross-agency protocol. But if no one is anchoring it to the day-to-day operation of the team, to those behavioral processes and the cognitive aspects that ensure functional team, it's useless. And usually when we're thinking about this, when we're thinking about kind of knowing the shared goals and the guiding principles, we typically think that it's important for people on the team who are in positions of authority to be the ones who know all of this, who know the guidelines kind of in and out. But I would argue that the best time to integrate this knowledge, the best time to integrate our shared goals or our guiding principles are going to be kind of in the moment. It's during the referral process, during the pre and post FI team meeting, if your center, your MDT has those. It's during the interview, during your case reviews. Supervisors or people with, the authority, quote unquote, aren't always there in those, in those moments. So we need MDT leaders at all levels, people on the team that can recognize the challenges each role faces, who can see the bigger picture, and who can steer the MDT kind of based on their guiding principles to reach their shared goals. So, for example, if, when we have instances where a case maybe can't move forward criminally, if providing for the safety of the child is one of your team's guiding principles, and said that law enforcement isn't going to be able to move forward criminally, we have conversations about how can we work together then to use the CPS process to keep this child safe. Maybe that means that law enforcement doesn't close their investigation right away, but they conduct witness interviews that CPS would have difficulty being able to do because of their role. Maybe the info from those witness interviews can help obtain an order of protection in family court, or give CPS the preponderance of evidence that they need to indicate. So, how do we use the individual roles to our benefit to achieve that shared goal, rather than pointing fingers about whose processes wouldn't allow for what? But someone has to facilitate that conversation, right? We need someone who's willing to have that conversation, someone to be kind of what would be called or considered an alliance developer, right? Someone who has the ability to navigate the various cultures and the various stakeholders that exist on the MDT. And then I would also suggest that in addition to knowing the organizations, you need to know the community in which your team operates. What is the public perception of any of your MDT partners at any given time? This matters because it impacts people's ability to show up and do their job. It impacts how victims come into our agencies and interact with MDT members assigned to their cases. It has the potential to impact policy and procedure kind of at individual agencies that trickle down to the MDT and require changes to our joint protocols or changes to our shared goals and our guiding principles. And then we also want to be thinking about, kind of on the same accord, what's happening on the collective level. I think that we can all appreciate this given what we've experienced as a country in the last 5 years. But I think this resonates with people in my area and in Western New York, kind of where my CAC is deeply as well, because in addition to things that kind of are going on in the larger collective, we've experienced a lot as a Western New York community. We had in May of 2022 the TOPS shooting in Buffalo, hate crime that was racially motivated. 10 people died and 3 people were injured. That same year, we had a major blizzard at Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, that killed nearly 50 people. November of 2023, we had an incident at the Rainbow Bridge, which is, you can see it, from our office here at the center, where a car exploded, and it was initially identified as a terrorist attack. And this past October, in October 2024, we had an advocate from one of our partner agencies in Niagara County killed herself and her 2 young children by going over Niagara Falls. So there's a lot, right, that outside of our agencies impacts us on kind of the day-to-day, and impacts how we're able to show up and how we're able to do this work. And then I think that kind of beyond the trauma we're exposed to by nature of working as part of a child abuse MDT, we said we're impacted individually and collectively by the agencies that we work for. and the systems we interface with and the clients we serve. So how we are able to show up on our team is a combination of the interplay of so many factors that are constantly changing. And our MDT members exist and have roles and identities outside of their jobs. And as leaders, it's important to know kind of the pulse of the organizations, the pulse of the community, and the pulse of our individual teams. Which brings us to the third piece of YOLO, which is learning others. So we touched on a few things that I just want to circle back to here, being the varying levels of expertise, varying levels of buy-in, those reluctant representatives, and how oftentimes not everyone on the MDT wants to be on the MDT. And we talked about the importance of effective integration and how group members feel about one another in terms of liking each other, trusting each other, respecting each other, and being able to create psychological safety in terms of optimal team performance. And we also talked about how MDT leaders often have no authority, right? So we're working off of influence alone. We're trying to inspire and influence the MDT towards those shared goals and towards that shared vision. And we can't do that if we don't know the people on our team. Now, ideally, we would get those kind of around us to buy into tapping into their own self-awareness, but we can't bank on that. So we need to have the ability to learn others, to know their strengths, their weaknesses, how they operate, and from that, kind of where do we need to accommodate? What do people need to develop that increased familiarity with other team members? What do people need to work as equal partners and have that mutual trust and respect? What is their kind of individual level of knowledge in their individual skills? How do they resolve conflicts? Do they come to meetings prepared? What motivates them, right? I think while individuals may want to see the team succeed, we're still primarily motivated by our own self-interest and our own results. We still tend to operate from that individual contributor lens or viewpoint, right? So leaders need to be able to develop skills to kind of identify and artfully align MDT members' self-interest with that of the larger team. Because the only motivation that really works is self-motivation. And then another reason that it's important to learn others is it helps us to identify the people who create or who engage in what research shows us or tells us to be issues or dynamics that sidetrack effective teamwork. So that's going to be things like dominant participants, side conversations during meetings, arguments or conflicts within the group, within your team, monopolizers or ramblers, and then those people who lack the required preparation necessary to come into the MDT, to come to the interviews, to come to case review prepared. So who are these people on your team, right? And where and how can you proactively mitigate some of these issues or dynamics? And this is not to excuse anyone's behavior or poor performance or to suggest that people are not held accountable. But again, as MDT leaders, right, we're operating from a position of no authority. So we have to be able to be amenable and give others what they need in order for the team to succeed. So kind of a very low level example of this. Our MDT has a protocol, and it is that MDT members arrive for a forensic interview 30 minutes prior to the family arriving. And this is so that the MDT can have their pre-meeting. So we do a pre-forensic interview meeting where they can discuss the case, they can plan for the forensic interview, and have ample time to do all of that without the family being made to wait. And we have, like I'm sure many of you do, an MDT member who is notoriously late, always has been, always will be. It is just who they are. The difficult part is this person also expects the team to either wait for them or to start and go back and cover the things that they missed. And depending on who's in the room, this creates tension, right? It creates tension amongst the team. So now we tell this person to arrive 15 minutes before the rest of the MDT and 45 minutes before the family. They're still arriving, right? They're still arriving 15 minutes late, but that's actually putting them on time with the rest of the team. And it's mitigating what we've seen to start to be kind of a point of contention or cause issues or feelings of resentment amongst team members when they're constantly having to wait for this person or go back. So you think that learning the people on your team is necessary, and it's also necessary for the last part of the approach that we're going to talk about today, which is optimizing your team. So the most effective MDT leaders are going to be people that align themselves with the right people on the team, with other MDT who we'll call champions. There is no way that one person alone can maintain kind of all that is needed to help an MDT function optimally all the time and across all levels. You need allies, right? And ideally you need allies in every discipline, because let's be honest, it's going to resonate more with law enforcement when it's coming from law enforcement. It's going to resonate more from CPS when it's coming from CPS, advocates coming from advocates, etc. You also need people in every discipline, because you need people that can help you understand the mission, the role, the perspective of those other disciplines beyond your own interpretation, right? And through your own lens of your role. So what skills, when you're looking for these champions, what skills do you want your champions to possess? We want them to have kind of those core leadership skills, right? We want them to be people who are proactive, who are able to communicate clearly, who can influence others, who can make decisions, right? Everything that you see on the slide here. But you also want them to be people who really buy into the MDT model and the bigger picture. People who are kind of what's called reasonably loyal, or people who speak positively of the team and of the MDT model, both within the CAC, within the MDT, and outside of the CAC and outside of the MDT. And you also want people that are willing to think and be part of an upstream approach. Especially in systems that are designed to be reactive, like our systems are. So we're going to watch just a quick 30-second video that kind of highlights the parable of being upstream versus being downstream. And then we'll talk a little bit about how do we use this upstream approach to optimize our teams.
You're standing on the edge of a river. All of a sudden, a flailing, drowning child comes floating by. Without thinking, you dive in, grab the child, and swim to shore. Before you can recover, another child comes floating by. So you dive in and rescue her as well. Then another child drifts into sight. And another, and another. Eventually, hopefully, some wise person will ask, who keeps chucking these kids in the river? And they'll head upstream to find out.
All right. So when we're thinking about this idea of upstream, and what does it mean to be upstream? Upstream efforts are looking at preventing problems before they occur, reducing the harm that's caused by those problems, and then kind of moving beyond symptoms and problems to address the root cause so that we don't keep dealing with the same problems over and over and over again. And again, most people on the webinar today can probably think of many examples of problems that, as part of an MDT, you deal with over and over and over again. And there's a lot of reasons for this. There's a lot of reasons why MDTs tend to operate from a downstream approach. We are reactive systems, and we are a reactive model. We're stuck in response because that's how we're set up, right? That's how we're designed to operate. We also face emergencies and put out fires much more often than typical teams. And I would argue that because of our roles, that our fires are bigger and our emergencies are more life-threatening. So it makes sense, right? That we don't have time to go upstream. But how can we start shifting towards this type of thinking on our MDTs? We already talked about uniting the right people and finding our champions in each discipline. But on an individual level, as a leader, we can be more intentional about this anticipating piece, right? So this information is kind of adapted from Upstream, which the quest to solving problems before they start. It's a book by Dan Heath that was published in 2020. And in his book, he says, when we can foresee a problem, we have more maneuvering room to fix it. But to foresee problems, we need eyes and ears in the environment, right? We need something that alerts us, like a smoke alarm would alert us if there was a fire. So when we're thinking about being an MDT leader and how can we start to be kind of intentional around trying to move our team upstream, we want to be thinking about who are the smoke alarms on our MDT? Who are the people with strong relationships, with that mutual respect, the people who are kind of privy to the information first? And then you want to pay attention to what those people are paying attention to, because oftentimes those are going to be the things, they're going to be the predictors of things that can mushroom into bigger problems, or they're going to be the predictors of previous problems that are going to or are set to kind of reoccur. And then we also want to be kind of constantly monitoring our team norms. This is helpful in predicting issues before they start or before they mushroom as well. We're seeing this right now in terms of our team and a shift in our team norms, as a lot of our core MDT members who've been part of the team kind of since its inception, who have really strong cross-agency relationships, are retiring. So this, combined with changes in leadership across all disciplines, and our norms are starting to shift towards a more siloed team. And this is obviously an issue, and it's an issue that has the potential to derail the entire MDT process, right? If it's not addressed. So when these issues arise, when we start seeing these predictors, how do we start to address this? And Upstream would say that we start to address this by exploring our points of leverage, or looking for the places in the system or within the MDT where an action could have an outsized or a more durable impact, or essentially, where can you make a small shift for big change? And that's where you need to focus your time and focus your intention. And sometimes to do this, you have to identify and involve what would be called power people, right? And you may have to be identifying and involving these people along with your champions. And power people are going to be people that are close to the problem, who have the experience, the expertise, and the authority to make a difference, or the authority to make changes. So when we're thinking about this in terms of an MDT, we also want to be making sure that we're surrounding the problem by making sure that all of the agencies that kind of play a part in our multifaceted systems are involved in that action or in that small shift. And obviously, all of this is much easier said than done. And again, we're really just brushing the surface of all of these topics today. If you do want to kind of delve more into the upstream approach, the book has a lot of really good examples, and I have that information included kind of at the end of the presentation on our last few slides. So just as we're wrapping up, what are some of the barriers to an upstream approach? There are three main things that present, and honestly, I think that even taking the context of the upstream approach kind of out of the conversation, these are just three barriers that happen frequently on our teams anyways when problems or when issues arise. So problem blindness, lack of ownership, and tunneling. Problem blindness being either I don't see the problem or I see the problem, but it seems inevitable. Lack of ownership being I see the problem, I know there's a problem, but it's not my problem to solve. That's someone else's problem to deal with. And then tunneling, which I think happens most frequently, which is this idea that I can't deal with it right now. Yes, I see it. Yes, I know it. Yes, I see it. Yes, I know it's there, but I've got too much else to do, too many other things to do, and I can't deal with it right now. Again, we're at time, so we don't have a lot of time to kind of go into overcoming these barriers right now, but I think just taking a moment to kind of acknowledge them and how and where they show up on our MDTs. And then lastly, just kind of want to end here with it doesn't matter what your role is on the MDT, or if you've been working as a part of the team for 10 months or 10 years, everyone on the MDT has the capacity to be a leader and to help their team function collaboratively and effectively. And I would say that for those that are in leadership positions, or if you're in a position of authority and you haven't done the work, so you haven't been a part of the investigation or response at the ground level, I just really encourage you to be kind of extra intentional around respecting the perspective of those who have, right? Respecting the perspective of those who are in the arena doing the work. And with that, I thank you all for the work that you're doing within your MDT and for taking the time to listen to me for the last hour. Thank you to Guardify, right, for allowing these opportunities for professional development. We do have a few minutes for questions, but I'm also happy, like Melissa said, to answer anything we didn't have time for today offline, or if people are interested kind of in discussing working more with people individually or as part of your teams on some of the things covered today. If that's of interest, I'm more than happy to talk about that. And then we do have a ton of resources on the last three slides, as well as my contact information. And with that, I will hand it back over to Melissa if we have questions.
Yeah, so we've gotten some feedback, Shelley. This is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and just about yourself too. That was really nice of you. But something about the upstream barriers that I wanted you to go back to about the lacking of ownership. There were times where sometimes during a forensic interview, the child doesn't make a disclosure, and then it's almost like MDT's an immediate response is, well, there's no disclosure, there's no investigation. But in the forensic interviewer's heart or in the advocate's heart, something might have happened. So how do you go about that?
Well, I think that that is one of the things that when we talked about kind of using some of our meetings, kind of using that in the moment, opportunities to talk about what is the bigger picture here, and what are our shared goals in terms of the MDT. And I would say that depending on your role on the team, and I think that from a CAC perspective, right, this is part of our area of expertise, is to talk about, and this is, I think, for forensic interviewers as well, this is your area of expertise, and to talk about child development, the disclosure process, the barriers, right? So what are the reasons why maybe this child didn't make a disclosure today or isn't comfortable making a disclosure today? And just being able to have those conversations and to talk about that, and maybe to suggest, like, do you think it would, I know they didn't say anything today, but we have all of these other kind of contributing factors. We have all of these other reasons to believe, these red flags, that this may be happening, even though this child isn't at a place where they're ready to talk. Do you think it would be worth it? Or would you consider having them come back in a week or in 2 weeks, when they've had the opportunity to kind of to go home, to process, to see that they're not getting, we can only control what happens within our doors. We can't control what happens at home. But if they're not getting in trouble once they go home, sometimes that's what it takes. Like, we know, or we have kids that make a very limited disclosure during their initial interview, and they're doing that kind of just to test the waters, to see, can I put this out there? Can I, do this in a way that it's going to be received, that people are going to believe me? And oftentimes, when that happens, they will ask to come back, or there'll be reason for them to come back.
We said. One of the questions was, to your point, also very difficult to explain to victims and families when DAs are unable to file charges. We are working with our therapists to handle those situations better, but as a victim, they may think that we don't believe them. Any suggestions would be helpful.
I think that that's one of the benefits too, to really, to knowing what does prosecution need, right? So in that individual case, what prohibited prosecution from moving forward? Because I think that if you can give that information to the victim, if you can give that information to the family, and explain it and help them understand it, that this has absolutely nothing to do with you as a victim. It does not have anything to do with us believing you. It's just, unfortunately, the way that the law is set up, or the way that the process is set up. It doesn't necessarily make them feel better or encourage them in the fact that, their case is still not going anywhere. But I think it shows that your team is knowledgeable, that everyone's on the same page, and that everything was done that could be done. It wasn't for lack of effort or because they weren't believed. I definitely think that, involving therapists in that process, if you're able to, involving advocates in that process, if you're able to, is ideal too, because then it gives families the opportunity, or that victim the opportunity, to have someone to follow up with, right? And even just to be able to say, like, if you have questions that come up, you can call me, you can ask me, we can talk more about this, right? The answer may not change in terms of we can't prosecute, but we have the opportunity and the ability to kind of work through this with you and to process this with you after today.
Definitely. And kind of to that same vein, Lisa had mentioned at times we have referred the child for therapy, and the therapist lets the team know when or if the child might need or be ready for that second interview. So kind of to your point, Shelly, for that first question. And I know we only have 1 minute left, so let me go over some other housekeeping kind of end of presentation stuff. So it does look like that's it for our time today. Please look out for an email later this afternoon that will explain how you can complete the evaluation form. You'll receive your certificate of attendance after that. And then also, if y'all have any follow-up questions, please let Shelly know. She'd be happy to answer. But a million thank you, Shelly. This is amazing. Thank you for providing
Yeah,
this.
thank you all so much.
Bye, everyone.